I'm Talira Montrell, and the night before my wedding, I woke up to the sound of scissors cutting through my silk. When I turned on the light, 4 wedding dresses lay on the floor, sliced open like someone wanted to carve me out of my own life. And the worst part wasn't the ruins scattered at my feet. It was knowing exactly whose hands had done it, and realizing they didn't think I deserved happiness enough to leave the pieces intact. That was the moment something in me finally cracked quietly. Cleanly, just like the dresses they destroyed. The drive up the mountain felt endless. The road swallowed in white as if the Rockies were trying to warn me before I got there. By the time the lodge finally came into view, its timber frame glowing faintly under a curtain of snow, I'd convinced myself that this trip would settle something inside me, that being back with everyone would make the days ahead feel steadier. The moment I stepped inside, that hope cracked. My parents were locked in a sharp whisper fight at the long wooden table, arguing about seating charts and bedroom arrangements as if the whole event rested on their shoulders. Marla stood by the fireplace, snapping photos of the lodge, documenting every angle, but not bothering to look up when I walked in. No smile, no welcome, not even a glance long enough to say they'd missed me. I managed a soft, "I'm home," letting it drift between us like a bridge they might choose to cross. They didn't. The air barely shifted, cold in a way that had nothing to do with winter. My mother's eyes flicked to me just long enough to land on the garment bag in my hand before she asked if I'd brought the dress. Her tone clipped and clinical, as if she were inspecting luggage instead of greeting her daughter. I let out a breath and forced a small smile, telling myself it was just stress, that weddings brought out the worst in people. Upstairs, the quiet felt heavier. The door to my room sat slightly ajar, a detail so minor anyone else would have dismissed it. But I knew I'd locked it. On the nightstand, half hidden beneath a wedding catalog, lay an envelope I hadn't seen before. The heading made my pulse hitch. Pension office. For Talira Montrell only. I stared at it, the edges digging into my fingers, an unease spreading through me, colder than any wind seeping in through the window. I set it down, whispering to myself that the next few days were meant to be joyful, that I wouldn't let small things overshadow that. But something deep inside me already knew the real storm hadn't even started yet. Morning came with a bitter wind scraping against the windows, the kind that made the lodge feel smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I headed downstairs, hoping the quiet rhythm of making coffee would ground me. But halfway through the hallway, I stopped. My parents' voices drifted around the corner. Not the casual kind of chatter I grew up hearing, but hushed, clipped fragments like they were stitching together a plan. She's not wasting another dime. Once that wedding happens, she won't look back. We can't let this go through. They didn't hear me at first, but the second my foot creaked on the hardwood, their conversation died mid-sentence. Both of them looked up with stiff smiles that faltered at the edges. My mother said they were going over reception logistics, her tone too polished, too quick, like a lid snapped over a boiling pot. I carried my mug upstairs, telling myself not to overanalyze, but something tightened in my stomach as soon as I stepped back into my room. The air felt disturbed, as if someone had just left. My garment bag hung slightly off-center, no more than an inch, but I knew I hadn't touched it since arriving. While refolding clothes in the drawer, my hand brushed the pension office envelope. The flap wasn't sealed anymore. A thin tear ran beneath the edge. Small but unmistakable. Someone hadn't just found it, they'd opened it and put it back exactly where they hoped I wouldn't look. A chill ran up my spine, sharp enough to make me sit down. Later, when I went to speak with the lodge manager about unrelated scheduling details, I overheard him mention that my parents had requested the third-floor hallway cameras be turned off the night before. For privacy, they'd said. I was the only one staying up there. I didn't respond. I just nodded and walked away. My pulse loud in my ears. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one starting inside the walls of that lodge and inside me. Sleep never settled that night. The wind hammered the roof, making the rafters groan like old bones. I lay awake, watching shadows flicker along the bottom of my door, trying to convince myself that everything felt strange, simply because weddings were stressful. and families were complicated. But around 1:30 a.m., the doorknob turned with a fragile click. A slow sweep of footsteps eased across the room, soft, dragging, deliberate. Then a quick, metallic rasp sliced the silence. Another, and another. Fabric being cut. No mistake. The footsteps drifted away. The door whispered shut. Cold air curled around my ankles, raising every hair on my body. I sat up, heart racing, but exhaustion pulled me under again before I could fully register what I'd heard. At dawn, I opened the closet and everything inside me went still. All 4 dresses, every one I'd carefully chosen, lay ruined. Silk shredded, lace torn open. The main gown split clean down the center, so precise it looked like someone had taken their time. A scrap of lace clung to a boot print near the corner of the rug. The tread was unmistakable. My father's. I stared at it until my eyes burned. My mother walked in, glanced at the wreckage, and dismissed it with a casual suggestion that I shouldn't overreact. No shock, no guilt, no recognition of what they'd taken from me. The cold I felt wasn't from the draft. It was from the realization that the people standing closest to me were the ones quietly pulling the threads of everything I had tried to build, and the storm I'd feared had already arrived. It had come from within my own family. I carried the torn pieces of my dresses downstairs, the fabric heavy in my arms like the weight of something I couldn't name yet. My parents and Marla were at the breakfast table, eating, sipping coffee, scrolling their phones so calm it bordered on surreal. They looked exactly like 3 people who had slept soundly while I lay upstairs trying to make sense of the night. I set the shredded silk and lace onto the wooden table, watching their faces closely. None of them flinched. "Who did this?" I asked, the words coming out colder than the wind outside. They exchanged a glance, then turned to me with synchronized annoyance, as if I were the one disturbing a peaceful morning. My father insisted an employee must have entered the wrong room. Oh, he said it so casually that for a heartbeat, I almost believed him. But then my eyes dropped to the boots on his feet, the worn tread with the same distinctive pattern I'd seen stamped on my bedroom rug. I told him I recognized the print. A tiny, involuntary flicker crossed his face before he masked it with irritation. Marla immediately jumped in, accusing me of overreacting. Her voice cracked just enough to betray her. I lifted the scissors I'd pulled from the laundry room trash, the hinge still speckled with strands of my dress. Marla swallowed hard. My mother turned away, her shoulders stiffening. Why, I asked. No anger? Just the question. My father stood and stepped closer, leaning in with a breath that carried the sharp mix of coffee and cigarette smoke. He said I was embarrassing myself, that weddings could be postponed, that I was being unreasonable. That was when the truth slid quietly into place. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to stop the wedding. My mother let that truth slip even further when she muttered that if I married, I'd leave, and then what would they have left control? That was the word she didn't say. I walked toward the lodge manager to ask about the cameras. He told me my family had requested the 3rd-floor hallway be shut off the night before, unaware that the upgraded system still recorded low-light backups. The cold inside me deepened. There was proof. Marla's voice wavered behind me, almost pleading. She told me I shouldn't watch the footage. In that moment, I realized something important. She feared what was on that video more than I did. The conflict wasn't simmering anymore. It had erupted. I locked myself in my room and sank onto the wooden floor. Snow battered the window, casting pale flashes across the walls like signals urging me to brace myself. I opened the pension office envelope. The words inside hollowed me out. My parents had tried to access my military records. They had searched for benefits, allowances, anything they could claim. A red-circled section, Dependents Claim Inquiry, marked a request I had never signed. They hadn't just destroyed my dresses. They had tried to rewrite my life for their gain. A soft click at the door startled me. Marla stood there, eyes already wet. She begged me not to escalate things, insisting our parents only wanted what was best. The words felt absurd hanging in the air between us. I reminded her of the torn gowns, the tampered documents. She broke, sobbing that she'd only followed what our father told her, that he convinced her I'd leave them behind once I married. I asked if she truly believed sabotaging me would keep me close. She couldn't answer. Her tears weren't remorse, they were fear. Then she confessed the line that gutted me deeper than the scissors had the lace Dad said, "If you didn't have a dress, you wouldn't get married." The words crushed something inside me, quietly, completely. After she left, I opened my laptop and pulled up the lodge's backup camera footage. It was grainy, but clear enough, the three of them slipping into my room at 1:30 a.m. I didn't watch the rest. I didn't need to. I went to my locked suitcase, opened the double latches, and lifted out the navy dress whites, the crisp fabric glowing under the dim light. The two stars shining like a reminder of who I truly was. The moment my hand touched the uniform, everything crystallized. I would not walk into my wedding as their victim. I would walk in as myself. I slipped out of the lodge when the night was blackest, snow slamming into the windshield so fiercely the wipers could barely keep up. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving, but Marla's uneasy stare as I pulled on my coat told me she suspected exactly why. The drive to Cheyenne Mountain was a long grind through whiteout silence. By the time I reached the guard station, snow had crusted across the hood. The guard straightened at the sight of me, greeting me with a crisp, "Good evening, Admiral," and a question I couldn't possibly answer honestly. Inside, the base felt steady in a way my life didn't. My boots echoed as I walked straight to Elena Rhodes's office. She took one look at me and saw through everything I tried to hide. Instead of explaining, I placed a torn piece of lace on her desk. Her expression tightened. She told me my parents had contacted the base, looking into my military file and probing financial dependency questions they had no right to ask. Worse, they had inquired about potential early retirement, as if they could map out my future without me. Rhodes handed me a warm towel, grounding me, then told me they were trying to cut what they thought made me strong, but they forgot what my strength actually was. Her words sparked something deep in me. I opened my double-latched case and lifted out my navy dress whites, the sharp folds. The cold gleam of two stars my family never cared enough to ask about. Rhodes watched me dress, telling me it was the first time she had seen me wear who I truly was. As I stepped into the hallway, a young officer froze and stood at attention, his respect reminding me of the truth my family had tried to bury. I drove back to the lodge with a different resolve. I wasn't returning to justify myself. I was returning to end the lie. By morning, staff were decorating the lodge for the ceremony. No one expected me to walk in wearing full uniform, but when I did, conversations died instantly. The warmth from the fireplace seemed to vanish. My mother gasped. My father shot up from his chair, and Marla dropped her phone. I asked, calmly, if I wasn't right on time for the wedding. Whispers rippled through the room. "She's an admiral." Why didn't they say an older veteran stood at attention? And the clean snap of his heels struck harder than any accusation. My father hissed that I was turning the wedding into a circus. I told him he'd already turned it into an attack. Marla begged me not to escalate, but I reminded her I didn't need to destroy my own dress to upset anyone. Then the lodge manager arrived with the footage. My parents' faces drained. Marla backed away. The grainy video showed all three slipping into my room, flashlight sweeping, scissors slicing through silk. The room gasped. Then the groom's father, a retired Navy captain, condemned their actions as a disgrace to any American who'd ever served. Silence suffocated the lodge. My father stammered excuses about wanting to keep me close. I met his eyes. "You just admitted it." And the entire room froze under the weight of that truth. I stood before the screen while the shredded truth replayed in cold, grainy light across my uniform. The room was so silent I could hear logs splitting in the fireplace. My parents and Marla clustered together, trying to shrink behind one another, but nothing could hide what everyone had just seen. The video showed everything: my mother digging through my accessories, Marla ripping the main gown from its hanger, my father guarding the doorway like a lookout. Each snap of the scissors hit the room like a blade to bone. When the footage ended, no one dared speak until the groom's father, a former Navy captain, stepped forward. He placed a steady hand on my shoulder and declared that destroying my dress was an attack on my dignity, something no one had the right to take. My father lashed out, insisting people didn't understand. I looked him dead on and told him to explain himself. He couldn't. The silence exposed him more than any words. My mother cracked first, shouting that they hadn't wanted me to leave the family. Marla whispered the final truth that my father said if I had no dress, I wouldn't marry. Gasps rippled across the lodge. A relative rose and said I was the strongest person in the room. I stepped toward the altar, the stars on my shoulders catching the light. I wasn't the bride the vey tried to break. I was the woman who refused to bow. Once the video stopped, I asked everyone to sit, not to argue, not to humiliate my family further, but so the truth could land where it needed to. The room settled into a heavy quiet as I reached into my folder and lifted the pension office envelope, holding it up so every set of eyes could see it. This is why they destroyed my dresses. My father's fingers tightened around the back of his chair, knuckles whitening. I told them plainly that my parents had accessed the military system to look into my benefits, that my father had signed a falsified inquiry, and my mother had hidden the letter. They weren't scared for me. They were scared of losing the financial advantages they imagined they could claim if I stayed unmarried. A murmur rippled across the room, followed by a veteran shaking his head, saying what none of my relatives seemed willing to, that what they did was illegal. My mother burst into tears. My father's lip trembled as he tried to defend himself, insisting they hadn't known things would escalate like this. I looked directly at him and told him he had known exactly what he was doing. He just chose the path that served him, not me. Then Marla dropped to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. She admitted she'd followed our father's instructions because she feared that once I married, no one would care about her anymore. I stood still, watching the people who shared my blood fold under the weight of their own guilt. They loved me, in their way, but their love had always required me to be smaller than who I was. My father stood abruptly, and for the first time in my life, he spoke with a vulnerability that didn't sound manipulative. He said they didn't realize I'd grown so strong, that they thought if I became too independent, they'd lose me entirely. I told him it wasn't my strength that cost him our relationship. It was his weakness, the weakness of choosing harm over honesty. He sank into his chair as if the wind had been knocked from him. I scanned their faces one more time, not with vengeance, but with clarity. I'm not seeking revenge, but from this moment forward, there are boundaries. You're welcome to stay for the wedding, but none of you will shape my life again. Around the lodge, heads nodded, not in agreement with me, but with the principle behind my words. The truth had been spoken, and it didn't need to scream to be heard. The ceremony began under a wash of warm golden light, the soft pull of violins weaving through the lodge like a slow breath after a long night. Beyond the windows, snow drifted through the evergreens, quiet and steady, as if nature itself was trying to cleanse what had happened. I stood at the head of the aisle in my navy dress whites, the twin stars on my shoulders catching the candlelight like tiny embers. Elena Rhodes appeared at my side, her presence a calm weight. She asked gently if I had someone to walk me in, for the first time in years. I felt something steady and genuine in the space between me and another adult, a warmth I didn't have to earn, a respect I didn't have to fight for. I slid my hand through her arm, and we moved together. Guests rose to their feet, not because tradition demanded it, not because of the uniform. They stood because, for once, I wasn't shrinking to fit anyone's version of me. I was simply myself, fully, unapologetically. My parents sat in the last row. No tears, no protests, no attempts to reclaim the moment. They watched in a quiet that carried both regret and something that looked faintly like hope. Maybe that was all they could manage right then. When I reached the altar, the man I loved reached for my hand and gave it a small, grounding squeeze. And in that simple gesture, I understood that the storm I had survived wasn't just about shredded dresses or forged documents. It was the years of letting others decide how much of myself I was allowed to be. After the ceremony, I didn't rush toward my parents. I offered them a nod, an acknowledgement that healing was possible, but only if they understood the boundaries that would protect it. Healing takes boundaries. Boundaries take courage. And I had finally found mine. Over the next few months, they changed in ways I never expected. They went to counseling. They stopped intruding on my finances. They stepped back from decisions that weren't theirs to make. Marla began building a life shaped by her own hands instead of the shadows she used to cling to. We didn't return to who we once were. We didn't pretend the past hadn't happened. But what grew between us was real, imperfect, humbled, honest. And I, Telera Montrell, walked forward from that day with a new steadiness, standing straight in my uniform, and standing just as straight inside my own heart.